8 years ago, my business partner Craig Hardy and I started out on the most remarkable journey. We just didn't understand. We didn't understand why Malawi, a country with so many beautiful natural resources, water, land, climate, incredible people, why was Malawi so underdeveloped? So, like the good lawyer and product developer that we were, we decided to do it ourselves. And we decided to establish our own community-engaged, fruit growing and fruit processing forward-looking business. I think that when we looked at that, by definition, we had to start with the question of, what don't we know? We started with a mango, and we finished with that question. What don't I know? A question too many of us are sometimes too proud and too scared to ask. Now, I can tell you that in my case, the answer is many, many things. But that aside, I'm hoping today to be able to demonstrate for you how the piece of the Malawi Mangoes Road I was lucky enough to play a part in can resonate with you. And we can also talk about necessarily areas of our failure. I remember it very clearly when we sat down in 2009, sitting in London, Craig and I, in only our second meeting to discuss this idea, this ridiculous notion that we were going to go out, we were going to go and find all of the people to build this farm, and then we were going to build this farm, and then we were going to build this factory, and then we were going to build these customer supply chains. Absolute lunacy. And I remember, actually in an off-the-cuff between the two of us, we said, you know what, before we even start properly, I think the first thing we have to do is, get our arms round the universe of what we don't know. So we did, and here's my notebook. Question 1, page 1. How do you grow a mango? All year round? And my favorite question, bananas, plant or tree? But when we look at it, and we look back at it 7 years later, it's very easy for Craig and I to know why we did what we did. It was so simple. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't philanthropy, though it had philanthropic consequences. It was really based around an idea that a successful business in one of the poorest countries in the world could have a dramatic effect and benefit on the communities around it, and that actually in time, the strengthening of those communities would in turn affect the business. For us, we even felt about it that if we were going to be in these villages doing this work around enterprise, around income generation, then actually we could get experts in food, in health, in water, in nutrition, in welfare, to come with us and piggyback the enterprise work we're doing in order to make a bigger impact. We felt it was going to be the perfect collaboration. And in fact, we thought it would be a really good approach to development in Malawi. Now, that's a word we hear all the time. What do we mean when we say development? We've listened to much smarter people than us, and that's a long list. Talk about what that might mean. And for me, in my own uncomplicated way, I think it just means this. I think it means making people's lives better. Not in the fringes or in the fantasies, but in the main, for the most. What makes your life better? What makes us feel that our lives are better? And we use all kinds of tools now. We use the Social Progress Index, which looks at not just economy and income, but it looks at welfare, it looks at education, it looks at family relationships, it looks at the very notion of what feeling contented feels like. But the economics in a poor country like Malawi, the economics is the killer bit. The economics is always the first bit, and you don't have to take my word for that anymore. There's now compelling data to support that position. If we look at this graph, on the left-hand side, we've got our Social Progress Index, which, for our purposes, we'll just call the Making People's Lives Better thermometer. And on the bottom, you've got gross domestic product per capita. And really, beyond the jargon, that just means the total sum of everything we make as a country divided by the population. And what this graph and all of the scholarly work around it tells us conclusively is that wherever you are in the world, that first $5,000 in stuff we make as a country, that first 5,000 in GDP, that's the stuff which really kickstarts us up our Social Progress Index. So if the economy is the place where we've got to start, if income is the place where we've got to start, then how are we doing? Well, I think the answer is, in a lot of the world, pretty well. We can look at India, and over a 35-year period between 1981 and 2015, India, by the way, a country with very few natural resources relative to its size, with even less water, and with a population that during that period has grown in the hundreds of millions to over 1.2 billion. In India, they increased the average income per person per year, that's exactly what it sounds like, by 470%. In Vietnam, a country with its own history of troubles, their number's 700%. In Brazil, the BRICS powerhouse, they get 450%. And even in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, we're getting 436%. Well, that's outside Africa. How are we doing in Africa? Not so great. You look at Zambia, with its copper, with its minerals, with its newly found middle income statement. Over the 35 years, Zambia's only managed to register 111%. Mozambique, with its ports, its deep water, with its coal, with its varied terrain, Mozambique only gets 100. Even our champion, even our own powerhouse, the mighty South Africa, even South Africa only gets 112%. So what is it? Why is it that Africa does so badly relative to the rest of the world when creating that first kick of income for people? Generally, people now identify one factor more than any other, and it's that in Asia, unlike Africa, for that period of 35 years, we've simply adopted a mindset, top to bottom, of enterprise, of markets, of instilling that in our economies. And Malawi, how does Malawi do? Malawi, a country with $18.5 billion of aid over 35 years. A country where a quarter of the surface area is fresh water. A country which has never had a war. A country which has barely even fired a bullet domestically in anger. How does Malawi do? 16%. 16% in 35 years. Let me tell you straight what that means. Your father earned $10. 35 years later, you've managed to earn an additional $1.16. When we look at this, we have to accept that if Africa is performing poorly in relation to income generation, and it is, and if Africa is therefore struggling to get itself up that first $5,000 of GDP, and it is, then forget poverty ground zero. Malawi, by definition, is development failure ground zero. Now, for us, this means two things. One, there seems to be a total unwillingness across the sectors to understand that every ingredient, every part of our development tapestry is what makes up our development ecosystem. And what that means is that quite naturally, quite instinctively, across sectors, we adopt an adversarial position when it comes to talking about working together. At the same time, if there isn't an unwillingness outright to put market economics and an enterprise culture at the heart of our development strategy, then I'll tell you what, the comment from the public sector and from international communities and from government is almost invariably, that's not our job. Well, let me ask you this. If you want the enterprise sector to develop Malawi, how can the enterprise sector do that if it has to develop its own roads, if it has to develop its own power, if it has to increasingly develop its own education, healthcare, and welfare systems? What don't I know? It seems to me that there aren't enough of us asking those questions when we're here. And the result? The result is a fragmentation. Look at this map of central Malawi, pretty current World Bank development investment projects. Doesn't it seem incredibly piecemeal to you, and disjointed, and littered around? Why aren't we tackling each of these water, power, justice, agriculture? Why aren't we tackling these in a more joined up, in a more holistic manner? I can give you an example from our own experience. And I have to tell you, there's no easy way of telling this to you guys, but for the men in the audience, when it comes to agriculture, I'm just going to say it, women are better at it. Much, much, much better at it. I can tell you that from 7 years' experience, there literally isn't a single job which would require more commitment, more diligence, and more concentration that I wouldn't give to a woman over a man in the field. And actually, because of this, we realized at MM that we just wanted to recruit a lot more women. But we also realized that if that's what we were going to do, then we were going to have to get serious and quickly about childcare to scale. Now, I know this will come as a surprise to you, but I don't know that much about childcare. And when we asked around, we realized that none of us really knew that much about it. But in the spirit of our magic question, what don't I know, we thought, let's go out there and find the people who do. So we wrote to about 18 months ago, a year ago, to the leading childcare agencies and this multi-million-dollar company with the highest sustainability standards and ratings in the world wrote to these guys with literally a blank piece of paper. We've got the budget, we've got the commitment, we're looking to recruit 1,000 women over the next 3 years from rural households. Will you help us, from scratch, design a childcare solution for both our farms and factories? And let me tell you what the numbers are. I'm a numbers guy. 30% of the people we wrote to didn't even acknowledge the fact that we'd written or write back to us. 30%. 90%, that's 9-0, wrote to us and in one form or other said it was beyond the scope of their work to work with a private enterprise. Now guys, there are already people who will be saying, Jonny, just 1 second. Just 1 minute. It's more complicated than that. They may have allocated their budgets in that time. They've already allocated their stuff. They've already got their programs. And you know what my answer is? That's terribly interesting, and it's precisely my point. If we are so wooded for trees, if we are so form-based over substance, that when an organization, public or private, reaches out in those terms to us, and we can't even muster the acknowledgement that, you know what, I can't do that, but we should do that. I'm going to put those guys in touch with the right people, then we have to accept we've got a very serious problem. Now I'm going to give you an example of a collaboration which is wildly succeeding and which we can all be incredibly proud of. You know, when we first started years ago, we started with a smallholder sourcing program for mango. It's a beautiful partnership right down in the villages between enterprise and between village, to bring mangoes into the enterprise culture. Well, 2015 actually, well I should first say that unlike a lot of organizations, we took an unusual step. We wanted to really bring the collaboration to life. So for our extension workers, we actually rented them houses in the villages. We wanted this to be something off the road, off the beaten track, somewhere where everyone could gather around together. 2015 was really our first commercial season, and the numbers don't lie. In an 8-week period, we secured 2,000 metric tons of mango from 5,000 of some of the poorest people in the world. But here's the kicker. For those 5,000 people, we put nearly $100,000 into their hands in the same period. The development effect is seismic. It's massive. And to give that a context for you, that is over half of the 16% increase that a Malawian has seen in 35 years in an 8-week period. As much as I know for Craig and I it's one of our greatest successes, the best part about it being that it was funded through a public sector loan and grant. That's real commitment, real collaboration between public and private sector, right in the rural heartland, changing the lives of some of the poorest people in the world, and all around the notion of enterprise. Now for us, it might surprise you to know that it's also the arena of what I consider to be our greatest failure. Because this was, after all, a collaboration directly between enterprise and village, with a remote funding source, a public sector funding source, but remotely. Where were the actors on the ground? Where are the litany of sectors and NGOs dealing with food, with education, with welfare, with health, in what is now a captive audience in that village? Can you imagine the development impact when we went forward, if we were able to bring all of those development services together in one place? What don't I know? I have to tell you that I've looked at many, many public sector brochures, and I can't count the number anymore, which talk about the need to work with private sector, to work with enterprise, to develop a collaborative culture. I can, however, count on less than 2 hands the number of actual examples that are even being attempted, let alone executed, on the ground. What don't I know? People have to stop seeing the private sector just as a source of funds. And we have to see the enterprise sector as the welcome consequences of its endeavor itself. And that is enterprise. Craig and I tried really hard. We tried really hard to get people kicked down this road. And I think we would hope that whatever our failures, we would say that we would hope one of our successes is that more people are asking our magic question, what do I know? Followed by the next two. Who knows that? And would they be prepared to work with me? It was Charles Darwin who said, in the annals of human history, we're shown that it's those who collaborate, those who improvise most effectively, who are the ones in the species that prevail. What don't I know? Many, many things. But now, more than ever, I'm excited about a future of seeking out those who do know and working on these big questions together. Thank you very much.